Damon Fordham, Professor of History at Springfield College and Virginia College in Charleston, South Carolina, on the morning of December the 6th, 2013, and this is the morning after news has come out of Mr. Nelson Mandela's death. For those of you who don't know, the song I just played just now was referred to as Nkosi Sikelel' Africa, which translates into God Bless Africa. It was written by Enoch Satanga, a South African minister, back in 1903, and it is the national anthem of South Africa. And so it was important that I think I do that as a little tribute to Mr. Mandela. Now, much is going to be said about this great man over the next few days. Yesterday I was in my car going to class when I heard the news, and being that I was of the generation that was so greatly influenced by this man, I just had to say a few words about him this morning. Now, Mr. Mandela was born in 1918 in a rural village in South Africa, and his father was a chief. And being that his father was a chief, he grew up with a kind of regal and authoritative bearing about himself. His mother was one of the chief's 4 wives. And both of them saw a greatness in this young man, and they sent him to school at an early age, where he learned to love reading and music and public oratory. Much later, he went on to study at Fort Hare University in South Africa. It was that time the school for blacks over there. And one of the problems with South Africa was it was ruled by these people known as the Afrikaners, who were whites of Dutch ancestry as well as a large number of British folks. And over a period of time they developed a system known as apartheid, which became official law in 1948, where they basically had everything separate for whites and blacks, similar to the Jim Crow situation here in the United States. And blacks were denied the right to vote and even to own their own property as well as own weapons. So Mandela was growing up as this system was beginning to crystallize. After studying law at Fort Hare, he practiced in the big city of Johannesburg with several friends of his who were major colleagues, Walter Sisulu and Oliver Tambo. And he became a leader in his own right as part of the Youth League of the African National Congress, which was formed in 1912 to fight discrimination in South Africa. Now, soon he began to stand out from his comrades because he was very tall, very regal, very authoritative, and he was quite an articulate speaker. However, initially, the ANC tried to fight the oppression of Africans with nonviolence. But in 1960, a large group of black women were shot in a place called Sharpeville, called the Sharpeville Massacre. And Mandela began to realize that no matter how much they protested peacefully, nothing was really being accomplished. So, in 1961, he was interviewed by a British journalist about his situation, and you can see this video on YouTube as a matter of fact. And on the question of violence, this is what Mr. Mandela had to say. Let's see here. There are many people who feel that it is useless and futile for us to continue talking peace and nonviolence against a government whose reply is only savage attacks on an unarmed and defenseless people. And I think that the time has come for us to consider whether the methods which we have used for us to be continued to be adequate. In other words, it's very possible that this may lead to violence. So he and his comrades organized Ukomo Wisizwe, the Spear of the Nation. And they began a series of sabotage attacks against various buildings in South Africa, power plants and the like. Many people said that this was terrorism, but Dennis Goldberg, one of Mandela's colleagues and one of several whites who were arrested with Mr. Mandela when he was arrested some years later, said that the only actual victims of these attacks were some of Mandela's own colleagues who were hurt by misfiring their own bombs. So much for terrorism. Well, anyway, this television broadcast led to, of course, Mr. Mandela's infamy as a leader. He began to be known as the Black Pimpernel, after the Scarlet Pimpernel of European literature, because the police were unable to catch him. But of course, eventually he was told on and caught in 1962. And so he went to trial and was arrested. And then they found some plans linking him to the sabotage attacks. So he was retrialed during the Rivona trial of 1964. And at that trial, he gave this long and really passionate speech about the African people and what they wanted. It was sort of a South African I Have a Dream, actually. But he closed with these famous words. You see, Mr. Mandela was actually going to be sentenced to death along with his comrades. But Mandela made this wonderful speech near the end of it where he said these following words. During my lifetime, I have dedicated myself to the struggle of the African people. I have fought against white domination, and I have fought against black domination. I have cherished the ideal of a democratic and free society in which all persons live together in harmony and with equal opportunities. It is an ideal for which I hope to live and achieve. But my Lord, if it needs be, it is an ideal for which I am prepared to die. Judge DeWitt knew that Mr. Mandela wasn't playing. And also outside of the window were thousands of Africans wearing signs saying, "We stand by our leaders." And they weren't playing either. So Mr. Mandela instead received life in prison. And even Martin Luther King, as well as who was in London at the time, comment on this, as well as Malcolm X, and even the New York Times. But over a period of time, the rest of the world forgot about Mandela. But activists continued to press for his release, even as South Africa's struggle continued under men such as Stephen Biko and Bishop Desmond Tutu. Well, around 1983, the Special AKA, whose lead singer was Jerry Dammers, did a song called Free Nelson Mandela. And it alerted myself, who was in college at the time, as well as many other people, as to the story of Mr. Mandela, and people wanted to learn more about him. This book of his speeches, The Struggle Is My Life, was published. And a lot of us read that and really got interested and started protesting against apartheid while we were college students. And during this period, of course, worldwide attention was placed on Mr. Mandela as well as the apartheid struggle in South Africa. And because of this outside world pressure, Mr. Mandela was freed on February the 11th, 1990. That was a great day. Many of us watched television and cried when he was freed. And many of us were inspired because we didn't have leadership like that in America then, or to a large degree now. So when Mr. Mandela was freed, he began to negotiate with the government in regards to possible peace, in spite of all this violence. Because not only did you have the interracial violence, you also had intra-racial violence against the competing African groups of South Africa. And he went to one such location and told the people flatly, take your guns and take your knives and your weapons and throw them into the sea. They had to see what the bigger picture was as far as the struggle went. And the world began to see that type of guy he really was. At one point, while he was incarcerated, during the 27 years that he served in prison, the South African judge refuses to allow him to go visit his mother's funeral and that of his son, both of whom died within a year apart of each other. But in spite of that, this shows you what type of guy he was. One of his daughters wrote him a letter while he was in prison in regard to all of this. And get this. This is what Mr. Mandela replied in 1971 to all of this. But even the chief magistrate of mighty Johannesburg, South Africa's largest city and Africa's richest town, has his hands firmly tied. He cannot do what he likes. Even junior officials in other departments may wield more power to him. In matters of this kind, it is never wise to single out individuals and lay blame on their shoulders. Such individuals themselves may not be responsible for the decisions that they make. Wow, that's charitable. And he also had a lot of other good ideas regarding leadership and education and so forth. He basically explained that education was the passport in which to take one from a position of poverty to a position of influence. So as the world saw what type of leader he was, in 1994 he ran for the presidency of South Africa, as the rights to vote were soon granted to African people again. And however, he ran a very principled campaign. Many people promised their people the moon once they run for office. Not Mr. Mandela. Listen to this. He said to crowds, "Do not expect to be driving a Mercedes the day after the election or swimming in your own backyard pool. Life will not change dramatically, except that you will increase your self-esteem and become a citizen in your own land. You must have patience. You might have to wait 5 years for results to show. If you want to continue to live in poverty without clothes and food, then go and drink. But if you want better things, you must work hard. We cannot do it all for you. You must do it yourselves." Well, Mr. Mandela passed last night, much to the sadness of the world. But as we see, he had a lot of great things to say. And we can take comfort in the following. Although Mr. Mandela made a great influence on many of us and had all these wonderful things to say, in spite of the fact that he is no longer with us, his teachings live, and we can continue to learn from them. This is Damon Fordham speaking on the death of Mr. Nelson Mandela.